Was there ever a moment, that you thought, what am I doing? I had a great job, a great future ahead of me.
Some people say, you should have something to fall back on. If you're going to start a business, you should have something to fall back on. If you have a passion or a career that you're looking to go into, just have a fallback. My advice is have no fallback position, because if it's something that you're passionate about, you have to burn the bridges behind you. And I did that.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Amanda Marlowe, and welcome to this week's episode of the CBIA BizCast, powered by Google. We are here with the CEO and founder of Nuovo Pasta, Carl Zuanelli.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here.
So good to be here.
We appreciate you making the trip up to Hartford, and we really want to hear, I think you have such an interesting story that many people maybe can't relate to in the same way, but I think that there's so many lessons from your story, your journey, and I, am excited to have you share it. But first, let's start off. What is Nuovo Pasta?
Wow, what a great question. What is Nuovo Pasta? Well, specifically, Nuovo Pasta is a fresh pasta. It's a fresh pasta company. It's actually Nuovo Pasta Productions. And we make things like ravioli and tortellini and long cut pastas like fettuccine or linguini, tagliatelle. We also make gnocchi and sauces.
And you guys have been doing that for over 30 years now.
35 years this April.
Can you believe it?
No, you know what? I really have to pinch myself sometimes because it just seems as if it were yesterday that the company was started. Yeah.
And today you go in, you obviously you have a number of facilities in the Stratford area. You're working around the manufacturing floor, but 45 years ago, your work life looked a little bit different.
It did. It did look a lot different, as a matter of fact. I was in the financial services world, and financial services a little bit different than pasta manufacturing, although there are some similar things. But very different world. And in manufacturing, you're really focused on producing a great product daily. Whereas in the financial services world, it's a little bit of a different focus.
How did you make that jump and kind of what made you take me back to the little bit of a younger you and where, you had been working in New York City, right?
Yeah, I had been working in New York.
And then decided to make a shift. Tell me about that and kind of.
Well, the journey started a little bit before then. And I'll start with this. When I recall I was 13 years old. And I was at a party with my maternal uncles. And I remember this year, I was seated on the patio with almost all of my uncles there on that patio. And one of them said to me, Carl, what do you want to do when you're older? And I was 13. And I had a very clear answer, which was, I don't know, but I know that I want to have my own business. And that declaration at that point really manifested into what is today. But the journey went a different direction than having my own business.
Was entrepreneurship something that ran in your family?
It was. I had an uncle who has an airplane parts business. Some of the other uncles worked at that facility as well, and it became a very, very successful company. It still is today, and that was some inspiration. But I'm not too sure if that was the only inspiration. There was this thing inside of me that just said that I wanted to have my own business, and I didn't even know what that was going to look like. I went to Pace University. And while at Pace, they have a cooperative education program. And the cooperative education program allowed me to dip my toe into corporate world and specifically into financial services. Yeah, so that's how I got into financial services.
How long were you in the financial services sector?
Well, it was my sophomore year in college that I became involved in the cooperative education program with Citbank. And after going through a management trainee program, and I was working part-time, about 20 hours a week, after about 2 months in, they offered me a full-time position. And when the question that you asked directly was, how long was I in financial services? I was in financial services until about 1987. So that was about, 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years.
And so obviously at that point, we can all understand the work ethic, right? Going to school, working full time. You certainly wasn't one that just kind of put your feet up.
No, you know what? I actually started working full time. Well, not full time, but I started actually working for the first time when I was 13. I was a busboy at a restaurant in New Rochelle, New York, an Italian restaurant at night. And during the day, it was back in the day of Jimmy Carter, and President Carter had inner city work programs. I was raised in New Rochelle, New York. And I worked cleaning up parks and rebuilding parks all day long during the day. And then I'd work at night. And I don't recall ever not having a job since then.
And so fast forward many years later, I guess, we're now in the late 80s. And you decided, I'm going to make pasta. Was it a dream?
Well, it wasn't a dream to make pasta, but I had, lived a life growing up, as I mentioned, in New Rochelle, New York. My mother was the daughter of Italian immigrants. My father's Italian side of his family came from Venice, and he was born in Manhattan. But when my parents had met, they had both very much embraced the American culture. My father was in financial services. My mother was a language teacher. And I grew up in a home that had an Italian culture in it because my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, lived in the home with us and shared the home with us, or we shared the home with them. And it was a bilingual home. And they had brought a lot of culture from the old country, including the food and how the food was prepared. And, pasta was very present in our home growing up.
So was little Carl sitting at the counter, rolling gnocchi or, stirring the sauce?
You could say that little Carl. My grandmother never made gnocchi. Again, they were from an area in Italy where gnocchi wasn't a popular dish. But when she did make fresh pasta, she would take out a rolling pin, which I have behind my desk at my office hanging up, which reminds me of the love, which was the secret ingredient that she put into every meal that she made. And she would roll out pasta, and she would cut these noodles, and she would dry them on a bed sheet on her bed, on a king-size bed. And this was done at special events and for special occasions, and we would have pasta. But we would eat pasta 2 or 3 times a week, at least.
Is that same joy that you kind of hope people experience now of eating that fresh pasta?
It's funny that you use the word joy because I refer to pasta as joy on a fork. It really is. I've never seen anyone eat pasta and not be enjoying it. Right. It brings a smile to their face. It really does. So pasta has always been an element of joy in my life for sure. So, but again, starting the business, it wasn't, okay, let's do pasta. To go back to that time in 1987, there was a crash. And I was working for Merrill Lynch at that time. I'd made a transition. I was with Merrill Lynch at the Fifth Avenue Financial Center. And I recall that there was a lot of turmoil in the market at that time. And there was a lot of fear in a lot of hearts. I have to say I was young and naive, and I didn't have that kind of a fear. But there were some things, and there was a couple of tipping points that made me decide, now's the time that you should really exercise that entrepreneurial spirit. And I did. And I had done a lot of research on recession-resistant items, and food being one of them. Per capita consumption in the 1980s was going through the roof with pasta. Before that, it was sort of an ethnic thing, an ethnic food where Italian Americans would be eating most of the pasta in the United States. Well, that changed in the 1980s. There was a boom in pasta consumption. And I looked a little bit more into it, and there was an emerging category, and that emerging category was refrigerated pasta.
So the wheels were starting to spin.
And the wheels started to spin, yeah. And it was called in those days fresh pasta, and it still is.
And so the wheels are spinning. You're starting to kind of think, okay, what can I do? How can I make this a reality? You'd grown up around pasta, your grandmother, you said, laying it on the bed. How much experience then did you have? Were you continuing? Were you, you went home from your job at Merrill Lynch probably late in the evening and were cooking up sauces? What did that look like?
Well, it's interesting that you say, how much experience did you have? I had actually no experience except eating pasta up until that point.
A taste tester.
I was a taste tester, yeah. And I loved pasta, and I still do. And I had actually put together a business plan at that time, and I presented it to investors. And I had clearly outlined the per capita consumption trend that was taking place in the U.S. and laid out what the refrigerated pasta category looked like. It was in its early stages. Nestle had just entered the market. And I put a plan together, and I presented this business plan. I still have the book. To some investors, and they asked the same exact question, Amanda. They said, what experience do you have making pasta? And I didn't have any at that point. They said, why don't you go get some experience and come on back, and then we can have a conversation. So, simultaneously, or around that time, I had also, mentioned to my father, my parents, my mother, that, I'd be leaving Merrill Lynch. They're going into my 5th year in financial services. And
they're probably thinking, what are you thinking?
Yeah, they thought I was completely off my rocker. My father thought I was insane. He had been one of the early founders of a reinsurance company. He had spent his life in commercial insurance, most of his time working in Manhattan, and he had recently been one of the early participants in a company that was started in reinsurance and was growing. And I think he was very proud that I was at Merrill. My older sister, was also in financial services. She was with a municipal bond insurance company. And I think, he was just beaming with pride. Mm-hmm. And when I told him that I was going to start a pasta company, after I was able to get him back onto the chair that he fell off of, I think he started to understand what I was looking to do. And after he embraced the concept, which took a little while, he said, as long as you treat it like a big company from day one, I think you're going to be just fine. You're going to be very successful. And I always followed that guidance and advice.
And certainly we've seen the growth that Nuovo Pasta has gone through over the years, especially in recent time, kind of going from 30 to 60 employees to now you have a couple hundred.
I went from one employee.
Well, certainly.
Right? And then I early on had a partner. Later on went on to be very successful in another entity as well. But today, there's well over 300 employees. We have 4 facilities in Stratford, Connecticut, one of them being a distribution center, 2 of them being manufacturing locations, state-of-the-art pasta manufacturing facilities. and a warehouse. And then in Cleveland, Ohio, we acquired a business where we make our sauces as well as long cut pastas like tagliatelle and things like that.
How did you end up in Stratford, right? You had been in New York, decided you were going to kind of go in with this business. And then I know it obviously geographically, but to decide Stratford is the place. Tell me about that.
Well, after my college years in New York with Pace, my parents had several years before that moved up to Wilton, Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
And I had moved back home and was, commuting into the city while I was at Merrill. And when I decided to start the company, if you recall, that investor said, why don't you get some experience? And I had investigated a lot of the factories in the New York metropolitan area that were started by first-generation Italians. And the pasta that was being made there was very 1970-esque in terms of their offerings. So it might be a cheese manicotti or a stuffed shell, which were fantastic. But what I had seen in New York was an evolution in pasta, where there were things like lobster ravioli or wild mushroom ravioli being served in fresh pasta in restaurants. And there really wasn't a lot of that being produced. And there was a restaurant in South Norwalk that was called Pasta Nostra. And it was my mom who said, Carl, I know that you're, doing some investigation on fresh pasta. I was still at Merrill Lynch. She said, your father and I just had a magnificent meal at a restaurant called Pasta Nostra in South Norwalk. It has recently received an excellent rating from the New York Times critic. And when we were there, at the next table, Paul Newman was eating, and that same very night, Martha Stewart was there. And you should just go down and check it out and see what it's all about.
Now, was this before or after you had presented your plan to investors?
This was after.
After. So thinking I need some experience, I'm going to go check it out.
Well, once again, they had said, why don't you get some experience? So I'm at this point, I'm determining I'm a 24-year-old guy trying to figure out where I'm going to get this experience. And I took a day off from Merrill and I headed down to South Norwalk. And I remember it was a Tuesday, and it was a Tuesday morning. And I saw someone standing in the window of this restaurant making ravioli. They had these imported Italian pasta equipment pieces in the window. And there was a fellow that was making ravioli, and I tapped on the window, a motion that I wanted to speak to him. He unlocked the door and he let me in. It happened to be the owner, chef. And I told him that I was interested in learning how to make pasta, and did he have any job openings for that? And he looked at me, and I didn't have the pinstripe suit and tie.
I was going to say, what were you wearing at that point?
I had my civilian clothes on, and he asked me, have you had an experience in restaurant cooking before? And I had not had any experience in restaurant cooking. As I mentioned, I'd worked in Italian restaurants as a busboy when I was younger. And I told him about my background growing up as Italian-American heritage and culture in the home. And he said, I'll tell you what. He said, if you're willing to cook with me at night and I'll teach you how to cook, I'll teach you how to make fresh pasta. And I said, you got a deal. And I went back to Merrill, and that week I gave them my notice that Friday, and they politely walked me to the door with a corrugated box filled with my belongings, because, you don't give them notice.
Nobody leaves there, right?
Well, I guess they do leave, but maybe the assumption was I was going to go to a competitor. I told them I was going to start my own business. I didn't go into any detail on it. And I'll tell you what, the following week I found myself standing in that same window in a white T-shirt and jeans and an apron covered in flour, making pasta. And I was there for a year and a half learning how to make different types of specialty fresh pasta.
And here we are.
And here we are. Fast forward. Seemed like it was yesterday.
That chef that first really helped kind of launch this for you. Did you ever go back and ask him why he took a chance on you?
I never asked him directly, but many years later, after Nuovo had started, we were recounting that day, and he said, Carl, 2 days before that, my brother, who was a partner in this, who was the pasta maker, quit. Huh. And I had to not only cook at night, but I had to start making pasta.
Right place at the right time, huh?
So timing is everything. Right? And I hadn't known that until many, many, many years after. So, yeah, it's interesting how the world and time just aligns to what your desire and passion is. Yeah.
Was there ever a moment, that you thought, what am I doing? I had a great job, a great future ahead of me.
I never...
You never looked back.
I didn't. I really never did look back. There's a lot of people who said that to me along the way.
Yeah, I imagine.
Even as I was standing in the window, they would say that to me. Many people that were close to me. I just didn't. Some people say, you should have something to fall back on. If you're going to start a business, you should have something to fall back on. If you have a passion or a career that you're looking to go into, just have a fallback position. And my advice is have no fallback position.
Okay.
Because if it's something that you're passionate about, that you'd like to pursue, that you'd like to attain, that you'd like to have as an outcome, you have to burn the bridges behind you. And I did that.
So what do you think it takes? A strong work ethic, passion, desire?
I think desire and passion are fundamental. I think if you've got a strong work ethic, that's going to be very helpful. But I think the passion and the desire, I think, have to be the first thing. I would suggest that a strong work ethic doesn't hurt.
And what would you say? Why do you think that the business has become so successful? Is it because of that passion that you still bring?
I think that the passion has to always be there every day. It has to be there. It has to be there for the fundamental aspect of what the product is, the product. But something I also learned that the word company, wanted to have my own company. Company is a group of people that come together to work towards an outcome. It could be a theater company, right? Or it could be a pasta manufacturing company. And among the most valuable assets of any company are the people. And I have to say, I don't think that I understood that when I entered into business. I think I understood that just as an experience of my life where, friends and family were always in the forefront, and making them happy and successful while doing the same thing for yourself just seemed to be the natural thing to do. But you asked me why after so many years. I think it's a commitment to the quality of a product, maybe the undaunting commitment to the quality of a product that some in Nuovo might say that I have, and the respect for the people that use their talents and their skills every day to achieve that same outcome. I think that's a combination.
At this point, we're going to put a pause in our conversation with Carl. He has so much more knowledge to share that we're going to make this a 2-part episode. So when you come back for our next episode, we're going to pick up where we left off and learn about Carl's darkest moments in his career and how he turned them around. Thank you for listening to this week's BizCast. You can listen, like, and subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us a review and let us know if you have ideas for a future podcast. And for more episodes, head on over to CBIA.com.